It was the evening of December 12, 1980, when a powerful snowstorm rolled through the remote village of Santa Lucia, nestled deep in the Italian Alps. As the winds howled and the village hunkered down under thick blankets of snow, for nuns, from the St. Cecilia convent sisters, Maria, Alessandra, Lucia, and Novella were last seen walking toward the chapel for evening vespers. Witnesses say they moved quietly in a single line, their black habits blending into the darkness. By morning, they had simply vanished, no footprints, no letters, no screams heard, just gone. At first, the villagers believed the storm had taken them, perhaps a roof collapsed or they lost their way in the forest. But rescue teams found no signs of a struggle, accident, or foul play. Strangely, the convent's main door had been locked from the inside, and there was no sign of anyone leaving. Their sleeping quarters remained untouched, beds made, Bibles neatly placed, and a pot of tea still warm on the stove. A sense of quiet dread began to take root. Something didn't add up. Father Marco, the young priest of Santa Lucia, immediately contacted the diocese and requested help. Investigators arrived days later, combing through the convent, the surrounding woods, and even the frozen riverbed. They used dogs, drones, and thermal equipment, all to no avail. Nothing, not even a scrap of clothing or a hairpin, was ever recovered. The entire village entered a kind of silent mourning. Candlelight vigils were held for weeks. But even the flickering flames seemed to offer no answers. Then, something even stranger happened. A local child claimed he saw the praying women standing in the field near the chapel late at night, hovering a few inches off the snow, hands folded, faces hidden by their veils. His parents brushed it off as imagination, but when several other children started reporting similar visions, the village elders forbade anyone from going out after dusk. Whispers of curses, spirits, and ancient rituals began circulating among the townspeople. What had once been a peaceful village turned into a place cloaked in fear and superstition. Still, no official cause or explanation was ever given. The Vatican sent word to leave the matter untouched after the initial investigation failed. Officially, the nuns were marked as missing, presumed dead, but for those who lived in Santa Lucia, the silence surrounding their disappearance was heavier than the snow itself. And the strangest part, every December 12th, at exactly the same time they vanished, the church bells would ring. Even though the ropes had long since rotted away. 3 days after the disappearance, Father Marco entered the chapel just before dawn for his solitary morning prayers. The entire sanctuary was cold, far colder than the rest of the convent, despite the fireplace having burned just hours earlier. As he stepped inside, his eyes were immediately drawn to the main altar, where an unusual and unsettling sight greeted him. The 4 missing nuns, rosaries each, one a distinct color and design, had been placed side by side in perfect symmetry, their crucifixes pointing upward. This precise, unnatural alignment gave the sense of intention, or ritual. Even more disturbing was what stood behind the rosaries, a single black candle, lit and burning slowly. Father Marco knew for certain that no black candles were ever kept in the chapel. They were strictly forbidden by traditional doctrine, often associated with occult practices or pagan rites. Yet there it was, melting steadily, giving off a waxy, bitter smell that clung to the air. The priest put it out immediately, his hands trembling. He checked the doors, the windows, even the candle storage cabinets, but everything was locked, untouched. There was no sign of anyone breaking in. He tried to dismiss it as some twisted prank, maybe by rebellious youths or someone seeking to provoke panic. But that theory crumbled the moment he approached the confessional booth. The red velvet curtain, covering the priest's side, was gently swaying, as if someone had just exited, yet the air was still, and no one was inside. When he stepped closer, a whisper echoed faintly from within the wooden box, not loud enough to understand, but clear enough to freeze him in place. He stood paralyzed for nearly a minute, feeling the temperature around him drop further, before summoning the courage to open the door. It was empty. Word of the candle and the rosaries spread quickly through the village. Many residents refused to enter the chapel after that, even in daylight. Some suggested a message was being left, or a warning. Others believed the nuns had never left the grounds at all but were trapped somewhere, or something. A few even recalled an old tale passed down from their grandparents about the silent vow, an oath once taken by holy women who sought to cross into the realm of stillness and never return. Of course, such stories were dismissed by the church as folklore. But in the absence of answers, those stories began to feel more and more real. By the week's end, Father Marco removed the rosaries from the altar and stored them in the sacristy. But he noticed something strange each night. One of them would reappear on the altar, always in the same position, always before dawn. He locked the sacristy, changed the locks, even slept inside the chapel one night. But still, the rosaries returned. On the seventh night, when he entered the chapel at 3 a.m., all four were back, and this time, the black candle was lit again. The wax pooled beneath it now formed the shape of a small cross, pointing toward the sealed basement door at the back of the chapel. Weeks turned into months, but the mystery of the missing nuns only deepened. With no trace of them ever found, the people of Santa Lucia tried to move on, but the convent and chapel refused to let them forget. At first, it was dismissed as the wind or the creaking of old stone, but soon too many began to hear it. Soft whispers, barely audible, drifting from within the walls of the chapel. Sometimes it sounded like prayer. Other times, like weeping. But most chilling were the moments when the voices spoke names of the villagers. Often at night, always in hushed tones, as if the walls themselves were confessing secrets no one was meant to hear. Father Marco was the first to admit it. He'd wake in the rectory with a cold sweat, certain he'd heard someone calling him from the nave. When he crept through the dark with a candle, there would be no one there, but the whisper would resume behind him, just barely brushing the edge of his hearing. When he leaned in closer, it would stop. But the feeling of being watched, that never stopped. The walls of the chapel seemed to breathe at night, like something inside them was alive and listening. Then came the reports from the children. Several local boys had been dared to sneak up to the chapel after midnight. What they returned with wasn't laughter, but trembling silence. One eventually told his mother that he'd seen a face in the wall, a woman's face. Pale and bruised, mouth sewn shut, eyes following him as he moved. Another child claimed the statue of Saint Cecilia had turned to look at him, even raising a hand slowly as if trying to hush him. Word spread, and by early spring, even the most devout villagers refused to attend Mass after sunset. In the months that followed, strange disturbances began happening in homes near the chapel. Crucifixes were found turned upside down. Hymn books flew off shelves without wind. Some residents said they'd been awakened at 3:33 a.m. by the sound of nuns chanting in Latin from outside their windows, though no one was there when they looked. Others reported sleep paralysis accompanied by the sensation of being held down by cold hands, hearing whispers that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. Livestock died without wounds. Mirrors cracked in locked rooms. It was as if something was spreading from the convent outward. The village council considered boarding up the chapel altogether, but Father Marco refused. He claimed to have seen visions, the outlines of the missing sisters, still wandering the halls, praying, sometimes even kneeling at the altar, weeping blood. He said they weren't angry. They were waiting. For what? He didn't know, but he believed it had something to do with the sealed room in the basement, the one no one had dared to open in decades. Though others begged him not to disturb it, Marco insisted he'd found a pattern that the whispers were trying to guide him, and so, in secret, he began to search for the key. The basement beneath the convent had long been sealed off, its existence barely acknowledged, even by those who lived and worked in the building. Generations of nuns had referred to it only as the old kitchen cellar, though no one alive could recall it ever being used. A heavy iron-plated door, reinforced with wooden beams and an aging padlock, stood at the end of a narrow hallway behind the convent's kitchen. For decades, the door remained untouched, until Father Marco, increasingly convinced the key to the sisters' disappearance lay below, began obsessively trying to access it. One stormy afternoon, in October 1993, restoration workers brought in to stabilize the crumbling foundation of the convent, accidentally uncovered part of the hallway floor near the sealed basement. Beneath the cracked tiles were strange etchings, faint but deliberate, circles interlinked with triangles, and what appeared to be Latin inscriptions, partially scrubbed away. The lead mason reported feeling nauseated after standing over them too long. A worker's flashlight shattered without explanation. Tools went missing, only to be found later stacked in the shape of a cross near the basement door. With permission from the diocese, Father Marco retrieved the rusted key from a locked drawer inside the sacristia, drawer that had never opened before. The key was unmarked, but when inserted into the ancient padlock, it turned effortlessly. The workers hesitated. Some refused to go further, insisting they felt an overwhelming sense of dread. So Father Marco descended alone, armed with nothing but a candle, a crucifix, and a leather-bound Bible. the iron door groaned open on its own, revealing a narrow stone stairwell spiraling downward into total darkness. The basement air was thick, damp and choking, filled with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like blood. The stone walls were lined with rotting wood shelves, old jars of preserved vegetables, rusted kitchen knives, and, on one far wall, a large mural, crudely painted in flaking red pigment. It showed four faceless women standing in a circle, surrounded by symbols nearly identical to those found under the chapel floor. Below the mural was a single sentence scrawled in ancient Latin: Vocin, silenti, transitum et. In the silence of voice, the eternal passage opens. But the most terrifying discovery came when Father Marco approached the far left corner of the basement, where a portion of the wall had caved slightly from age. There, hidden beneath a tattered shroud, he uncovered a leather-bound journal, half-burnt, its pages wrinkled with age and moisture. The ink bled in places, but one phrase kept repeating over and over. She spoke the vow beneath the bell. Most pages were otherwise blank except one, where the ink looked fresh. It read, in perfect handwriting, "We go where the bell cannot ring." The priest dropped the book. Behind him, something shuffled in the darkness, just beyond the reach of his candle's light dot, as Father Marco dove deeper into the mystery. The symbols, the journal, and the whispered phrases all began pointing to one recurring element: the bell tower. The convent's ancient bell tower, long disused and partially crumbled from neglect, had once stood as the village's tallest and most sacred structure. It hadn't rung in decades. Villagers claimed the bell's last sound echoed sometime in the early 20th century, after which the ropes were cut and the top room sealed. But why it was silenced was a question no one could answer until Marco uncovered a forbidden archive buried deep within the diocesan records. The records had been hidden, deliberately in marked boxes sealed in wax, their parchment scrolls wrapped in black twine. Inside were fragments of transcripts from a Vatican-led inquisition dated back to the 1600s. Focused on the very same convent, the writings accused a group of cloistered nuns of participating in something called ritus campani obscure, the ritual of the dark bell. According to the documents, this rite involved ringing the bell at an unsanctioned hour, precisely 3:33 a.m., followed by a sequence of chants not found in any canonical liturgy. Witnesses claimed those involved would enter trance-like states and speak in ancient, unknown tongues. Even more disturbing were the accounts of bodies discovered without wounds, eyes wide open, hearts mysteriously stopped left at the foot of the bell tower steps. The Vatican deemed the events blasphemous and ordered the tower closed indefinitely, its bell to never ring again. The ritual, the transcripts stated, was believed to be a perversion of monastic silence and attempt to ascend not toward heaven, but into something older, darker, and quiet as the grave. The bell, once a symbol of divine calling, had been twisted into a key that opened a passage, though to where? No one dared to say. Marco, shaken but compelled, began to study the layout of the chapel. That's when he noticed something peculiar. The pulpit, the altar, the confessional, and the base of the bell tower all formed a perfect geometric pattern matching the strange diagrams etched beneath the convent tiles. This was no architectural coincidence. It was a sigil, hidden in plain sight, likely constructed centuries ago. Each location in the chapel was designed to resonate with sound more specifically, to channel vibrations upward, to the bell. Could it be that the entire convent was once used as a vessel for this forgotten ritual? His mind returned to the journal's cryptic phrase. She spoke the vow beneath the bell. If the bell truly served as a key, then perhaps the nuns had tried to complete the ritual in 1980. But why? And what exactly had they vowed to cross into? Marco began hearing the bell in his dreams, deep, slow tolls, echoing through a place with no walls, no sky, only whispering shadows. Every time he woke up, the room felt colder, and the journal seemed to shift locations. He knew something was building. And if the bell tower ritual was ever performed again, it might not stop with just whispers. On the cold winter night of December 12, 2008, exactly 28 years to the day since the four nuns vanished, the village of Santa Lucia was blanketed in a deep, unnatural stillness. Snow had fallen steadily since noon, muffling every sound. No one was outside. The townspeople had come to dread this date, calling it the silent vigil. Most lit candles in their windows but avoided looking toward the old chapel. By this point it had been largely abandoned, services reduced to rare visits, and the bell tower left untouched, its staircase unstable and sealed off. But at exactly 3:33 a.m., the silence was shattered. The church bell, the very one believed to have been cursed, silenced, and long disconnected, began to ring. Not once or twice, but 13 slow tolls, each one more hollow than the last. No one pulled the rope. In fact, the tower was supposed to be structurally unsafe, yet the entire village heard it. Windows shook, dogs howled, lights flickered. Many villagers later said they awoke in bed, unable to move, watching shadows pass silently across their ceilings. Just as the final toll echoed through the valley, frightened yet drawn by instinct, a few villagers ran to the chapel. They found the front door wide open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, Father Marco, now older, slower, and visibly worn by the years of obsession, was kneeling at the altar, tears streaming down his face. He whispered, "They're here," over and over again. Behind him, a section of the rear altar wall had collapsed, revealing a small bricked-up alcove that had never appeared on any architectural plans. The wall was freshly disturbed, as if something had pushed outward from within. Cautiously, they approached the opening, flashlights trembling in their hands. What they saw stopped them cold. 4 skeletal figures, perfectly preserved, seated upright in a circle. They were clothed in what remained of nun habits, each bearing a rosary identical to the ones that had mysteriously reappeared on the altar years ago. Their bones showed no signs of decay beyond natural wear, no trauma, and no dust, as if they'd been placed there yesterday. But what truly disturbed everyone was the expressions frozen on their faces, mouths agape in silent screams, eyes open, wide, sockets hollow, yet somehow still watching. The room went cold. One man fainted. Another dropped his flashlight and refused to return inside. And still, Father Marco remained kneeling, whispering in Latin phrases no one understood. His eyes were vacant, staring toward the open bell tower above. He later claimed he hadn't broken the wall, it had opened on its own when the bell rang. "They didn't die," he murmured. "They transcended. And now, they've come back." But before anyone could question him further, his body stiffened. He began to shake violently, his mouth opening wide in what looked like a silent chant. And then, just like that, he collapsed. After collapsing at the altar, Father Marco was rushed to the village infirmary, unconscious and barely breathing. His vitals were erratic, heart rate spiking without cause, body temperature dipping far below normal. The nurse on duty claimed his skin felt like frozen stone, and when she tried to take his pulse, she could swear she heard a faint humming sound, almost like chanting, coming from within his chest. The doctors were baffled. He had no underlying conditions, no trauma, yet he hovered between life and death for nearly 13 hours, speaking only in broken Latin as he drifted in and out of lucidity. When he finally awoke, his eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. But as the priest's breathing steadied, his voice returned, only it was lower, gravelly, not like the voice anyone remembered. A nun who had once trained under him described it as a voice stretched between this world and something far beneath it. He refused food, water, or prayer. Instead, he simply repeated a single phrase: "They never left. They just crossed over and waited for the bell." No one understood what he meant, and the church officials who arrived the following day refused to let anyone question him further. Later that night, a Vatican representative ordered the convent and chapel completely sealed, citing ecclesiastical contamination. No further explanations were offered. Armed guards appeared by morning. By noon, the church's bell tower was boarded shut, and workers were seen pouring liquid concrete into the alcove behind the altar, entombing the skeletal remains once again. When the villagers asked why no investigation was underway, the Vatican issued a formal statement labeling the entire event a hallucinatory episode caused by underground gas exposure, despite no geological surveys ever confirming such claims. Inside the infirmary, Father Marco's condition worsened. He stopped speaking altogether. His body grew more rigid, his eyes never closing, even when sedated. But just before sunrise on the 4th day, the nurse assigned to his room reported hearing a single, distant bell, Tollevin, though the real bell had been removed the day before. Moments later, Father Marco sat up abruptly, wide-eyed and pale. He gripped the nurse's wrist, stared straight ahead, and whispered his final words: "They still pray, even now. But it is no longer to God." His grip released and he fell back onto the bed lifeless. Even after his passing, strange phenomena continued. Church bells in nearby towns rang at odd hours. Villagers reported hearing footsteps echoing in the snow when no one was there. Candles would light themselves inside locked homes. And one evening, a young girl drew a picture for her mother, 4 women kneeling in a circle beneath a black bell, their faces pale, eyes hollow, and mouths sealed shut. They visit me when I sleep, she said calmly. They say they miss the sound. The mother burned the drawing, but she couldn't ignore what the girl added just before bedtime. They told me they'll ring it again very soon. Since that night, the chapel has remained sealed, its windows boarded, its entrance padlocked by order of the Vatican. No official records mention the 4 missing nuns, and Father Marco's name has been quietly erased from parish documents. To the world, the convent in Santa Lucia is just another abandoned relic of old Europa forgotten, footnote, in a mountain village. No one visits anymore. But the locals know better. They say the bell still rings every December 12th, precisely, at 3:33 a.m., 13 slow, mournful tolls that no one dares to acknowledge. And if you stand too close to the chapel walls, you might hear soft prayers in a language you can't understand. Or feel something cold brush past your arm. Like a breeze from beneath the earth. Some believe the ritual was never fully completed. Others say it worked exactly as intended and that the 4 nuns didn't vanish, ... They crossed over. Wherever they are now, it isn't heaven. And it isn't empty. So if you ever find yourself in the mountains of northern Italy, and you stumble across an old stone chapel buried in snow, don't go in, don't knock. And above all, if the bell begins to ring, do not stay to count the tolls. Because the last sound you hear may not be the bell at all. It may be the whisper that follows it.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.